Hey there, Lead the Team Nation. Welcome back to another great episode. Today, I have for you Jon Ragan, who is the Global COO over at 360 Group Limited. If you're not familiar with them, they own iconic brands, including FAO Schwarz, Sharper Image, Wembley, and Vornado. And they are sold in over 90,000 retail locations around the world. You can imagine how their operations, how complex they must be around that. And by the way, Jon has extensive experience in the private equity world, but he also has expertise in driving enterprise growth and transformation, actually at Fortune 500 companies as well, including General Electric, Grainger, and Weyerhaeuser. Jon, welcome to Lead the Team.
Thank you, Ben. Great to be here.
So let's start where every great interview always starts, which is beekeeping. I understand that you have the distinction of being a senior C-suite executive and a beekeeper. What's the scoop on that?
So the bees are sort of my escape at times. I think one of the things that I found most critical as I've advanced through my career is the ability to have balance. It can't be all about work. It can't be all about outside of work, but you've got to have things that are, for lack of a better term, the escape. And for me, the bees provide that opportunity. I'm fascinated by both their place in the environment, but also how they work together and how they really do what they do, which is create honey and provide pollination for a lot of the plants and flowers in the area. So it's something that I did as a kid. I found it was far easier to do growing up in Kentucky. There was far less work involved, and I think part of that was just luck. I think part of that is changes in the environment over the years and some challenges that the bees have had. My wife likes to joke that my hobby has become a second career. So she certainly enjoys the honey and likes giving it away to friends. But for me, that's just something where I can leave work behind. I can leave some of the challenges that I'm facing day in and day out and really focus on something that provides balance and enjoyment to me. So I've got 4 hives today. I've had as many as 6, and I think 4 is probably a little better number, just from the workload and keeping everything on. But they're really fascinating creatures that I just enjoy learning about and continue to learn more every year that I'm involved with them.
So you got into it at a young age in Kentucky. Did you go ask your neighbor about it, or what drew you to getting into this?
No, I was actually in the Boy Scouts, and so this was an opportunity to earn my beekeeping merit badge. So I bought a handbook that I think the Boy Scouts actually provided, and there was a local beekeeper and bee supply store right around where I grew up. So I was able to get a hive that was already populated, and so it was really taking a fully functioning hive and moving it to the farm that I grew up on, and things just went from there. Again, Wow. It was far less work and management. I think part of that, again, is it's a little warmer in Kentucky than it is in Chicago at times, particularly January, February, March timeframe. But and as I grew up, I continued to do that throughout high school, and then obviously, I went away to college, and my dad still has obviously different hives today, but he's still got a few hives of his own that
oh wow.
So
I'm an Eagle Scout, and Boy Scouts really got me into so many cool things.
Yes.
At a young age. Beekeeping was not one of them, but a lot of other things regarding the outdoors. I was really into a lot of the competitions with knot tying and fire building and things like that. I really enjoyed that competition and getting our scouts kind of organized for that kind of stuff. But it says so scouting had a real formative impact upon you too, it sounds like.
It did. And growing up on a farm, my parents still live on the same farm I grew up on. My dad still, not as much as he used to, but still has about 130 acres there at the house. So when I go home, I'm literally staying in the bedroom that I grew up in as a kid. And so between the Boy Scouts and a lot of the stuff around the farm, it was really formative in terms of having responsibility, in terms of watching things grow and being responsible for their well-being. And it was one of those things that, as I've progressed through my career, that's always been sort of foundational in terms of how I approach things and how I approach life in general.
Well, all right. So fast forwarding to adulthood, you've got the bees. What do you say to people in your neighborhood who are terrified that they're going to get stung by your bees?
the bees don't want to harm you any more than you want to be stung by the bees. And I think one of the things people don't recognize for honeybees, once they sting you, the bee will die. Their stinger detaches if they sting you. And so they have an instinct that says the only time I will sting someone is if it's an absolute necessity. Now, bumblebees and wasps and things like that are different. They can sting multiple times. But for the most part, our neighbors haven't complained. I think the only concern that I've received is that one of our neighbors has a hummingbird feeder, which is basically, if you're familiar with a hummingbird feeder, it's sugar water.
It's sugar water.
Hummingbirds, yes. The hummingbirds will feed off of, well, bees like that too. And once the bees find her hummingbird feeder, I'll end up with some bright orange honey, and she ends up with an empty feeder. So, we try to avoid that where we can.
Yeah, I like it, and I hope that every leader out there has a chance to find a hobby that's like a lifelong pursuit. I think for me, tennis play has been like that for me. Okay. But I've tried other things too in the pursuit of sort of diversifying. Like I've tried improv theater. Which is terrifying and enjoyable all at the same time, and as well as others, guitar and all kinds of stuff. And I've kind of dabbled in things like that. But I think finding some kind of lifelong pursuit and being willing to explore that is really, really cool. And I think the honey bee has a lot of layers there for life, how they work as a community, how they thrive, how they take care of one another, how they communicate. I mean, it's kind of mystical in terms of how they work, but it's brought, and you don't have to riff on this, but I know, and I've read from like Seth Godin and some other people, how there's an element of teamwork. Bees can teach us a lot about teamwork.
Absolutely. And each bee has a role, and they know their role. And what's interesting is they can, if they determine that there's a shortage of a certain type of bee within the hive, the queen can actually determine, hey, we need more drones, or we need more forager bees, or we need more worker bees. And so they'll balance out the workload, if you will, within the hive throughout the summer. And the makeup of the hive changes significantly over the winter as they really draw down to a much smaller number of total bees than what you'd see in the summer. So it's all instinctual, but I think some of it is just fascinating to understand how they make decisions, for lack of a better term, and manage themselves for survival.
Well, there you go, everybody. You probably didn't expect to understand so much about the honeybee and leadership today, but you just got a dose from the mouth of a real live COO beekeeper. Now, thinking about your career beyond the hive, what is it that, or what's the bit of advice that you would give your younger self today?
I think one thing that has become clear to me over the years, and again, it takes time and it takes perspective to start to realize some of these things, but for me, it's really about enjoying the moment and living in the moment. And I think as I reflect on my early career and how I approached both my work life and my personal life, it was always about the next thing. It was always about the next promotion, the next raise, the next house. And while I wasn't unhappy in my 20s and 30s, I think what I've come to understand is that I didn't appreciate the things that I was experiencing in the moment. And I missed out on opportunities to build relationships in a workplace environment or spend more time with family and friends outside of work. And I think, again, probably that's, at least for me, someone could have told me that at 31 or 32, and I would have probably dismissed it. But I think
you wouldn't have listened to yourself anyway.
Exactly. I think the perspective of time, though, has really shown me that in my earlier self, and it's also something that I try and focus on today. I would say it's not always something that comes naturally to me, because I tend to focus on what's the problem at hand, what's the issue that we're dealing with, what's the challenge at work, and I don't appreciate the fact that there's a lot of good things happening and a lot of benefit that is being provided to me by those around me, and hopefully some benefit that I'm providing those around me as well.
So what happens, or who or what do you do that reminds you in those moments to kind of pull back and enjoy?
One of the things that I've done, and this was actually just a few years ago in my career, and I think we've all probably been through the different personality assessments and understanding, trying to better understand who you are. And over the years and parts of my career, I've done Myers-Briggs, I've done DISC. And 3 or 4 years ago, I took part in an Enneagram exercise. And for the first time for me, it was an aha moment to say, okay, this is where I fit within the Enneagram. And as I read some of the descriptors and some of the drivers behind my specific personality type, it was very eye-opening to say, wow, that really is me. And I think, with any exercise like that, there's probably pieces and parts where you say, well, I'm really not that way, or I can say, well, I don't do that. But I would say the majority of what I came to understand through that process was very eye-opening for me in terms of sort of a window into how I operate and how I think. And so understanding that, and part of that process was recognizing when I'm operating above the line and below the line, and taking that time to step back and realize I've generally got very specific behaviors and very specific thought process when I start to drop below the line, for lack of a better term, which means I'm not my best self. I'm not engaging in a way that is promoting the best of my capabilities, the best of my personality, the best of my support for others. And again, the typical signs are very, very consistent. And so having that awareness and knowing what those behaviors look like, and even what those thoughts look like, it's sort of that alarm bell. Now, it's not always easy recognizing that to say, okay, I'm going to pull myself out of this, but it certainly is an awareness to say, okay, I need to pause for a moment. I need to gain some perspective. And in some cases, it's reaching out to others. It's just a moment that internally I can take. And it's sometimes more than a moment. It may be a couple-day process to say, okay, I've stepped back. I've got that perspective now. But that's something, again, that until a few years ago, I didn't have. I'd done a lot of work around self-awareness and understanding, but I'd never had anything or any process that I've been a part of speak to me really as clearly as that did.
Yeah, the Enneagram is a powerful tool. It's I'm a type 3. Do you remember which type you are?
I am. I'm a very, very solid 1. So very
You're
much
a solid 1. Okay.
Yep.
And what you referred to, I think, and then in the Enneagram world, they talk about like the shadow side of your, and what does a healthy type 2 or type 1 or type 3 look like and act like? And when you get pushed beyond your boundaries, what behaviors start to emerge?
Exactly.
Are you looking to other people for lots of approval for everything? Are you stalling out? Are you getting paralysis analysis or whatever happens to be? But being able to, I think the Enneagram does a great job of pointing to what those behaviors are so we can catch ourselves in the moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But no, that's so good. And assessments can be great for that. Are you a journaler? Do you journal and
I've explored that. I've explored that at times. For me, it's not as therapeutic. It tends to be more of a forced exercise. So I found other things. Again, the bees would be a good example of that. I tend to spend a lot of time at the gym. I'm not as effective at the gym as I once was, but again, that's an area where I can step back a little bit and focus on other things besides some of those challenges.
I noticed about the beekeeping, going to the gym. And it's similar for me in that sometimes the best way to get out of your head for a while is to do something physical or take your body to another place entirely.
Right, exactly.
Sometimes it's hard to be clear, strategic, and thoughtful and self-aware when you're in your office in that same old environment. My understanding is that 360 Group's based in Hong Kong, right?
We have a part of our headquarters that's based. Our Asia offices are headquartered in Hong Kong. Our offices for merge source, and there's a couple divisions under 360 Group, but our U.S. offices are in Irvine, and then most of my team is actually in Hong Kong.
Okay, so what I'm getting at here is you've got lots of time zones that you're dealing with, and you're trying to manage all of that. And you talked about work-life balance. How do you think about, what's the advice you give to people around maintaining work-life balance when you've got people's work days who don't necessarily overlap well with yours?
It's a challenge, and it's something that I deal with almost on a daily basis. It's something our organization deals with, because in addition to our Hong Kong offices, we've got, again, a corporate facility in Irvine. We've got our largest USDC, which is based in Savannah, Georgia. So we're really dealing with not just 2 time zones, but often 3 or 4 as we try to do the work. And it really is a global organization. And for me, one of the challenges that I have is I very much like to complete a task. So in other words, I like to keep current on my email. I like to keep things completed. And the reality is I just can't do that anymore. Yeah, I wake up every day with 50 new emails from overnight that I didn't have when I went to bed.
Yes.
And so part of it for me has been understanding and accepting that it can't always be perfect. Again, going back to sort of my perfectionist outlook from the Enneagram discussion that we just had, I've had to learn to let go of some things. And I've got people on my team, particularly those that have been in the organization for a longer period of time, who tend to gravitate to that 20-hour days or weekend work and things like that. And it really has to be a discussion with them, sort of from my own learning and experience, that it's okay not to respond to everything in real time. It's okay to prioritize projects. And so my role really becomes, in a lot of those situations, providing that insight, providing, again, some personal examples from my own experience, but also helping to prioritize what is really urgent, what needs to get done in 24 hours, or what needs to get done this week versus what's a longer discussion or a longer term set of initiatives. And it's a constant challenge. And you talked about it. I think in some ways it probably got a little worse during the pandemic, just because we became so reliant on video. Everyone was disengaged. So even some of the work and decisions that could take place in the office now became a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting. And so it, in a lot of ways, what I've seen in this organization is it really reinforced some of that 24-hour availability. And it's something that, again, I struggle with. I do try to manage my own time in that sense. But it's a conversation that I regularly have with my directs and even the broader organization.
Yeah, it's such a good conversation to have, and to understand what is their ideal work day, what are they working on, and if you're really, I think, doing it right, it just forces more open communication around your schedule. Otherwise, it's so easy to let your email become your to-do list.
Exactly.
Like you'd wake up, you're going to get all your, I worked for international organizations before, and I'd wake up and I would have the 50 emails from people that had worked a full day before me.
Right.
And I'm like, man, I found myself like that became my to-do list. And I would deprioritize all the really important stuff that I need to be working on too, because I was just responding so quickly. But the reality is those people, like in Asia, did not need to be up responding to my email.
Exactly.
They're responding to me on the email I sent. And so we're just kind of torturing each other with our communication.
And we talked about earlier in the conversation, one of the things that I would tell my younger self, and that's another good example. I can remember 10, 15 years ago, and if I were to be honest, probably more recently than that, of going on vacation and still logging into email every day and feeling the need to respond, even though out of office was set, people within the organization knew that I was out. Anyone external that had sent me an email knew that, but I felt this obligation to go in and respond. And the reality is, again, there's probably times where we can't fully disconnect and fully unplug, regardless of what else is going on. But I think part of it for me is also setting that example with my team. So if I am on vacation or out of the office or doing something that's not work related, I'm not setting that double standard where I tell them to do one thing, but I'm also not doing that myself.
Yeah. What a great sort of trigger to be aware of when you're doing something as a leader that you don't want your team to do. And if you're responding because you are the COO to an email while you're on vacation, whether you realize it or not, you just told everybody else on that email that they should be working on vacation too, or responding to emails. And maybe that's what you feel as a leader. But I think most people say, and I've been in this, where don't do what I'm doing, but I'm doing it. And that's like, it's
Right.
like parenting too. You know, a kid doesn't necessarily do what you tell them to do. They're going to do what you do.
Exactly.
So powerful leading by example.
And to be honest, that's been a more difficult one for me to get my arms around, because again, particularly at the C-suite level of the organization, I think you feel the need to be available in the event that there is an emergency. And again, I think there's times when that's okay. But if you were really to look at a lot of the things that are in the email box, it doesn't rise to that level of emergency. And again, if I'm asking my team to behave in a certain way, I think I have to behave that way as well.
Yeah. So good. It's such a great thing, because like you become a better, more holistic leader because you remember, I'm leading people and exactly. I want to set the right example. Oh man, so good for all that standpoint. Now, you know, you and I were talking about before we got on here, Jon, about the importance of recognizing and appreciating the differences in how people learn, think, and react, and how this impacts leadership and teams. What's your overall philosophy on that?
I think it's a critical piece of being an effective leader. One of the worst pieces of advice that I ever got, and I didn't realize it at the time, was to treat everyone on your team the same way. And where that was coming from was a place of, you can't have favorites. You don't want to treat people differently. And so while I think the core guideline there is appropriate, you don't want to have favorites. You don't want to create a situation where there's, you know, multiple classes of employees that are part of your team. But the reality is everyone is different. And if you're treating everyone the same in terms of communication and conversation and discussion and how you expect them to work, my guess would be you're probably treating 90% of the organization in the wrong way. And so for me, again, a lot of this has been my own self-awareness and my own exploration over the years to understand how I work internally, but then also realizing that as I relate to others in the organization, there may be things that are perfectly natural for me in terms of approach or even dialogue or direction that other people would receive in very, very different ways. And I think one of the things that I always do when coming into a new organization or bringing someone new into the organization is really invest in onboarding, and not just with that individual, but pull in that individual's peer group, or pull in that my direct report team as a part of that. Because I think for an organization to be effective, you've got to have that understanding of the differences in people, both at the higher levels, but certainly at the peer levels of the organization as well. So that's one of the things, again, when someone new comes into my direct report team, we always take the time to go through that exercise. It may not be a full-blown Enneagram or personality sort of assessment, although I've done that before, but at a minimum, it's talking about and understanding, how do you work? What's your ideal work setting, and how does that relate to the people that you're reporting to and working with at the peer level?
Tailor your leadership to the people you're leading.
Exactly.
That's what I'm hearing. And it's just like, oh yeah, that of course, but saying it and doing it are two completely different things, especially when there's emergencies or the urgencies and we just need to get this stuff done. And taking the time to understand them. Now, but I think one of the things that you said that caught me was, okay, Ben, we focus on getting to know them and them getting to know us in the onboarding process. So it also reminds me of the saying, you know, you end up with people how you start with them, or you begin. Like the ending is representative of the beginning. And so you're trying to start with that area of awareness. So I just think that it's such a powerful thing, because a lot of times onboarding is all about teaching them how we do things around here, and almost like trying to shape and mold them into what we want them to become. But it sounds like you're flipping that on its head a little bit.
It's a challenge, because as you, again, particularly if you're talking about a direct report team of 6 people or 8 people, or you've even got a larger team that you're working with, again, everybody in that audience is going to be different. I'll give you an example of some of the things that I've worked through even within the last couple months. I have people on my team that are very comfortable if we're trying to solve a problem, for me to come in and say, all right, here's what we're going to do. Our objective is to solve this issue, and I need the team to execute A, B, C, and D. They prefer that because it's, trying to work through that root cause analysis or problem solving challenge. It's just not a place that they're comfortable. And if given very specific instructions, they will absolutely execute to the best of their ability. I've got others on my team who, if I went to them and said, all right, here's what we're trying to solve, and I need you to do A, B, C, and D to get us there, they're going to feel disenfranchised. They're going to feel disempowered, and they're going to be upset that they weren't a part of the solution process. So again, pulling in all number of different silos, even within the operations team, getting to that solution and getting the entire team in a process that they're comfortable with and that brings out the best of their capabilities and their abilities. It's a process each time, and it's a different process each time. But setting out with that objective, and again, for me personally, knowing the team and for them knowing me and trusting me throughout that process, it usually makes the result much more impactful and much more effective than it would have been if we tried to do everything where I provide the guidance or everything where I kind of turn it over to the team and we make a stew with it kind of.
Yeah, how you approach people on those situations with a problem. And I think people just don't think about that distinction.
Right.
Sometimes you have a leader who's like, look, I want my employees, I want to give them the problem. I want them to come back with possible solutions. I don't have to do all the thinking. And then sometimes you get people like, look, I just started. I've not been in this area. I don't even know where to start on that problem. I need you to give me a kickstart on the direction.
Yeah.
But as a leader, maybe you have a preferred way of giving direction or sort of asking for solutions, but it's not all about how you prefer it as a leader to be maximum effectiveness, to have maximum effectiveness over the long haul. It's what are the preferred styles of people that want to be led, and then finding that sweet spot, that melding of the two to create a truly engaged team.
And again, it's finding that sweet spot that works for everyone. And again, there's no set answer coming out of each problem or each scenario. It's probably going to be a little different each time of finding that most effective middle ground. But again, I think having the trust with the team and having that comfort level, and in some cases it's a vulnerability from my side if someone says, this isn't the best approach, this isn't working for me, or understanding that and knowing that I actually welcome that feedback. I'm more than interested to hear their approach and their input in a way that hopefully will improve whatever we're trying to work on.
When's the time you had an unexpected twist or failure in your career, and how did it help your growth or success on down the road, Jon?
So this is an interesting for me, and I would say fortunately it's only happened one time in my career. Although given the outcome, maybe it certainly was a growth moment. But for much of my career, I was involved in the wood products industry, and wood products is essentially tied directly to the housing market. So in 2008, the housing bubble crashed, and for the next 3 or 4 years, I was really in a difficult environment, and the company was in a difficult environment because there just was not demand for wood products for new construction and things like that. And it was actually a company where I had become very comfortable in the role. I really liked the people, and I actually remember thinking on a number of occasions, this is where I'll retire. This is where I'm going to spend my career. And I walked into the office one day, and I knew that there were going to be, for years, we had been in sort of a downsizing mode. In the particular role that I was in, there were 12 of us in 2008. By 2011, I was one of 2 that had that role and that responsibility for the organization. And so, really to make a long story short, I walked in one day and my career there was over. And it was I would say 80% a surprise, 20% not a surprise. But I had a good network. I'd lived in Seattle at that point for almost 12 years. And so my thought process was, well, I'll find something else, and I'll stay in Seattle. I'm established here, and I'll survive. So it was never a sense of panic, but it was a very clear understanding of this is what my path is going to be. It'll be slightly different with a different company, but I'm very set in my life and very comfortable where I'm at. And I ended up getting a call from a recruiter to interview with a company in Chicago. And I said, it sounds like a good opportunity, but I'm really interested in staying in Seattle. I don't want to relocate. I don't know anyone in Chicago. So I think I'm going to pass. And so the recruiter pushed a little more, and we ended up parting. And he called back 2 or 3 days later, and he said, "Look, I've got your resume. I know your background. I've talked to the company. They're really interested. And if nothing else, they'll give you a free trip to Chicago. Why don't you come out, interview? And if you don't like it, you don't have to take it." So I ended up, after a couple more days of I would say, negotiation with the recruiter, I ended up traveling to Chicago, interviewed with the company over the course of 2 days. Loved the opportunity, loved the culture. And it was really the company opportunity that set me on a path to having a global role. And one of the things that I liked about the process, they laid out a very clear development plan and what they wanted me to do for the first 12 months I was there, what then I would take on after that first 12 months. And to their credit, they lived up to every bit of that. And obviously, I needed to do my part during that process and during that time period. But it was really a turning point for me in that it took me out of my comfort zone, both personally and professionally, exposed me to, again, a global operation, which I had never had previously. And it's today, I can look at that one moment and know it has gotten me where I am today in my career. As a side note, if I had not moved to Chicago, I would not have met my wife, who also had just moved to Chicago, and we ended up meeting about 6 months after we both came. We came. She was relocating from Manhattan. I was coming from Seattle, and we met 4 or 5 months after we both arrived. And I look back on all the different decisions that I could have made throughout that process that would have made my life very, very different today. And I think the lesson there for me is you always have to be open to exploring new opportunities, getting outside your comfort zone, and knowing what your comfort zone is. I mean, again, there are things that I wouldn't do today that are just clearly off the table. But I think whether it's as a part of my current role or whether it's a part of new opportunities, being willing to challenge that comfort zone and the status quo is really, really important. And I think, again, for me, that was about 12 years ago. If I hadn't been willing to take that chance, so to speak, don't know where I'd be today, but it certainly wouldn't be where I'm at right now.
Such a good story. And it's interesting to hear that story after you revealed your Enneagram type 1, because right. That's not I would say the preferred type 1 vibe where, hey, we're going into the unknown. This could be messy. Right. I've got it under control here. We're driving, and, but then you were able to bring your type 1 to your new role, and obviously have a lot of success. But I love that. And it's a great lesson for all of us, or a great reminder that the classic idea of, so much opportunity happens outside of your comfort zone.
Right.
And you were willing to step into it, and met your wife in the middle of America. It cracks me up. One's in West Coast, one's East Coast. You had to meet in the middle, literally.
We did,
to come together. Man, Jon, such a good story and such a great interview. What's your parting thought for our listeners today?
I think from my perspective, it's if I were to leave the listeners with one thought, it would be enjoy the moment. And that can encompass so many different things throughout both a professional career and a personal life. And I've talked about that a few times during our conversation today. And for me personally, and I'm assuming for those people who are working on anything they're not good at, just because you're not good at something, it doesn't mean it's easy to address it. But I think for me at least, and I think for the people that are listening to the podcast, if you can enjoy the moment and appreciate the things that you have, it puts all of the other pieces into perspective. And again, I think helps you be a more effective leader and a more effective human.
Jon, we got to hang out again sometime, I think.
Would love to do it.